Good morning. Today is Monday, August 28th, 2023. Today, August 28th, is the 60th anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. That event is most famously remembered for the soaring rhetoric of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and especially the end of his speech, "I have a dream." It was a searing moment in American history that propelled the struggle of a lifetime, civil rights for all Americans. That event gave momentum to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and on August 6, 1965, the Voting Rights Act, which for the first time gave federal protection to minority voting. The 60th anniversary of this march comes at a critical time. Since 1996, Republicans have repeatedly alleged illegal voting with no evidence, no data. In 2013, the Supreme Court decision basically gutted the 1965 Voter Rights Act. Today, House Republicans in Washington have proposed what they call American Confidence in Elections Act. That act would limit mail-in ballots and drop boxes, prohibit taking food and water to those waiting in line to vote, lift remaining restrictions on campaign spending, and abolish federal efforts to combat disinformation. I mean, you just have to wonder, legislation not to allow bringing food and water to people who are standing outside in the heat. The fact is, the gap between white voting and non-white voting in America is the highest that it's been in years, and that gap is growing. In 2022, speaking in the Georgia district that elected John Lewis to Congress, John Lewis, by the way, was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington in 1963. Harris warned that we must not be deceived into thinking laws that make it harder to vote are normal. And she noted that those pushing such laws, again, against no evidence, no data, are not only putting in place obstacles to the ballot box, they are also working to interfere with our elections to get the outcomes they want and to discredit those they don't. This is not how a democracy should work. Yesterday, at a march in Washington celebrating the 60th anniversary of the original march, Martin Luther King III and his wife Andrea Waters King said that they plan to call on Congress to pass voting rights legislation. This is not about issues for one group or one ethnic group. It's about Americans. It's about creating a climate for America to fulfill its true promise for all its citizens. Although King's eloquent ending to his speech, "I have a dream," is one of the most famous pieces of oratory in all of American history. In fact, he added it extemporaneously at the end of his prepared remarks. It was not in his prepared remarks. And there are other passages of his speech that day, earlier passages, that were significant then and even more critical now. King said that day 60 years ago, "There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied?" We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. He said, "When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American has to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check. A check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice." King said, "Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all God's children." Alfonso Bernard was a speaker at yesterday's rally. And he added, "King spoke of a dream, an American dream, and here we are 60 years later. Blacks have experienced unprecedented wealth, education. We have more blacks in positions of power than we have had at any time in the history of America. We have an increasing number of black millionaires. With all that said, we still have the highest rate of poverty. We still have racial disparities in our justice system, policing systems, educational system, healthcare system, and economic opportunity. We still have a long way to go." The planning for the march in August of 1963 began in January of 1963. At the National Conference of Christians and Jews. It was there that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel delivered the opening address and for the first time met Martin Luther King, who gave the closing speech. Heschel began his speech by drawing a direct line from the Jewish experience of Exodus to fighting for civil rights. He said, "At the first conference on religion and race, the main participants were Paro and Moses. Moses' words were, 'Thus says the God, Lord of Israel, let my people go that they may serve me.' While Paro retorted, "Who is the God that I should heed this voice and let Israel go? I do not know God, and moreover, I will not let Israel go." The outcome of that summit meeting has not come to an end. Paro is not ready to capitulate. The exodus began, but is far from having been completed. In fact, it was easier for the children of Israel to cross the Red Sea than for a Negro to cross certain university campuses in America. I often feel sympathy for Rabbi Dr. Joachim Prinz. He had been a rabbi in Germany and then in the United States, and he devoted much of his life to the civil rights movement. He was one of the organizers of the August 28th, 1963 March on Washington, and he gave a stirring speech just before Martin Luther King delivered his speech. Can you imagine giving a speech, no matter how good it is, and then to be followed by Martin Luther King, "I have a dream"? But he spoke about civil rights and equality from a Jewish point of view, as Heschel had earlier done. And listen to what he said. He said, "When I was the rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin under the Hitler regime, I learned many things. The most important thing that I learned under those tragic circumstances was that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problems. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. A great people who had created a great civilization had become a nation of silent onlookers. They remained silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, and in the face of mass murder. America must not become a nation of onlookers. America must not remain silent, not merely Black America, but all of America. It must speak up and act, from the president down to the humblest of us, and not for the sake of the Negro, not for the sake of the Black community, but for the sake of the image, the idea, and the aspiration of America itself. Today is a day to remind all people, and a day for me to remind myself and all Jews that the struggle for justice for all and the eradication of racism is our struggle. And if we, you and I, are not speaking up loudly and forcefully on behalf of the civil rights and equality of others, we are not living up to what God tells us the exodus from Egypt is supposed to mean for us. We are not living up to what religion is supposed to mean for us. I think we can do better. And therefore, we must. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.